Hello everybody, welcome to Planet FPL, the world where everything revolves around Fantasy Premier League and a bit of football, which means today being Tuesday, People's Poll
Introduce
is
yourself.
a non-FPL subject. I'm Serge.
I'm James.
People's Poll topics were?
Yes, and Suj doesn't know this yet, but we're going to do the two losing ones on Patreon next week because sod it.
Nice.
Because I want to. So the three topics were Coventry City and the fact they might be about to be made homeless again. Since the vote went out yesterday, we can now confirm that they will play Blackburn Rovers tonight in Coventry at what was the Ricoh Arena, but it's now called something else. But I think we'll do Coventry on Money in Football on Patreon next Tuesday because that story is not going away. The other topic, which has been in the People's Poll several times and was leading through the first part of the morning yesterday, was about concussion protocols, very much in the mainstream media in this country again over the weekend following the incident with Emi Martinez, which caused quite a bit of an alarm. And there's also new data has come out over the weekend, which is supporting that concussion injuries are really leading to bad things in later life. I think we'll do that next Thursday rather than a quiz on Patreon as well, Serge, I think. The winner of the vote was essentially the question of, could FIFA ban Iran from the World Cup, which starts in unbelievably 19 days from recording. And since we put the poll out, Ukraine have put in a formal request to get Iran banned from the World Cup.
On the grounds of?
On the grounds of, and probably want to get in themselves a little bit, if we're being totally honest. Obviously, that country's obviously suffered terribly. But it's also partly on the grounds that the main issue at the moment is a human rights issue, but it's also believed security intelligence that's coming from the US believes that Iran is giving Russia drones, which is obviously having an impact. Those drones have obviously been used on the war in Ukraine at the moment. So Ukraine's argument is very much about it's kind of a war issue somewhat. The wider issue that a lot of other people obviously have concern about at the moment is the human rights issues that's going on in Iran. And it wasn't until I really started reading into it last night that I realised like what a seismic shift of basically a revolution going on in that country at the moment.
Yep. And interestingly, it's a combination of factors that are driving the revolution. Iran is obviously a religiously run state, right? So in some countries, there is a clear division between religion and the government. Certain countries obviously clearly follow a certain religion, but here it's like they're intrinsically entwined. It's an Islamic state, and obviously they follow Sharia law and all of these kind of things. This is obviously stemmed from, so I should say it's a religious issue. It's also a gender
very much
based issue suddenly where these are interlinked things where it's the rising up of women. This issue's obviously been caused by the hijab situation. There was the young lady that was forced into re-education and all of this kind of stuff, persecution, right? And then everybody stood up as a result of it, and then it now has bled into like dictatorship / civil war / unrest on the streets. So it's a combination of various things that have led to this situation in Iran, right?
Absolutely. It's very much from the football perspective where the argument, I think, globally at the moment is the lack of access for women. So by law in Iran, and actually it's a little bit confusing whether it's actually by law or whether they're just blocked from doing so. Women aren't allowed to attend football matches in Iran.
Okay.
So that's gender-specific non-equality, right?
Yeah.
Banning women from watching the football team. So
yep.
FIFA got in touch with Iran. I'll say got in touch, but in 2019, FIFA basically told Iran, you've got to change this. So it's believed what Iran did afterwards was kind of publicity stunts where they were letting selected women in. And even still, when they were allowing women in to watch the national team or the local clubs, they were still being segregated from men. There's in the national stadium in Iran, the facilities are not catered towards women in any way. So it's meant to be that even if you did get in, so a lot of women have to disguise themselves as men if they want to go and watch football matches in Iran. It's just literally logically just it's dumbfounded to try and imagine what that's like and why you'd risk yourself.
Yep.
People have been imprisoned for trying to get into football matches Just go and watch. You got a ticket, just go and watch a football match. Being in prison for that.
Yep.
I mean, that's archaic stuff, isn't it?
I mean, the punishments versus crimes for so many things in countries that are dictatorships are always come across as like, wow. Does the punishment fit the crime? So yeah, gender segregation is archaic, sure. But then this is like a cultural thing that's existed. It's not like it suddenly happened 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago. It's happening for years. And
43 years is a lot of these laws have been in place, it seems like. 19
days before a tournament, you think, okay, well, suddenly what's the tipping point now that means that Iran should be removed from the World Cup?
Well, the tipping point is obviously the young lady you mentioned, Mahsa Amini, sorry if I'm mispronouncing her name. She died. Essentially, she was wearing a hijab, which by law women in Iran have to wear. She was wearing it, but the morality police, and every time someone mentions morality police, they kind of have to do the air quote thing. They put her in the back of a van essentially because they reckon she wasn't wearing it properly. Some of her hair was on show or something, and that's what sparked. Kind of into about 50 days now of these kind of protests on streets. It's happened across 80 cities in Iran. I don't think we've even got 80 cities in the UK, have we?
No, it's no small uprising.
No, it's huge. It's huge, and people are obviously risking themselves, right? Because if you think that with this poor girl that she's been put on a van because she's not wearing an item of clothing properly, if you're out in public protesting, what could happen to you?
Yep.
So there's a lot of people obviously being brave out there at the moment and obviously risking
women
themselves,
just going in the streets and taking their headscarves off in defiance and what have you, which is very, very, very brave.
There's this signifying of cutting hair as well, isn't there?
Yeah.
So yes, it is, because by law it is compulsory for women to wear them. As I said, they're not allowed to attend sports events in stadiums. I don't know if you knew this one. Women in Iran aren't allowed to leave the country unless they've got permission.
Yeah, I mean,
from a partner or a guardian. I mean, there is no gender. It's just gender. I can't think of the gender racism. What would you call it?
Sexism.
Sexism. Yeah.
There you
Sorry.
go. Yeah.
It's just blatant sexism, isn't it?
But it's not new.
No, I get that. And it's also, it feels somewhat awkward to talk about it because they're obviously not our values, and we believe that these values are wrong, right? But as you say, it's been in place. I think this conservative leadership group that's been in charge in Iran, I think since 1979. So again, it's nothing new. It's just this uprising has happened based on this event very recently. Add in, you've got people asking questions about, are they potentially feeding stuff to Russia for the war in Ukraine as well. Yep. And you've got a lot of people sniffing around and asking questions. I mean, the reality is, in terms of should FIFA throw Iran out of the World Cup, well, there's a couple of laws in place that suggest that they should. Because FIFA's laws, Articles 3 and 4, say a football association, so like the FA in England, a governing body cannot be controlled by the government of your country, and that's written. Well,
this is part of the reason why India had that whole situation where they were temporarily suspended from FIFA because there was too much influence from the government in the governing body. They in theory need to be independent. And
no nation can discriminate in terms of, we're talking about a football association here, cannot discriminate against race, sexuality or gender. If a football association is not letting women enter the stadiums, well, they're discriminating against gender, aren't they?
Correct.
And therefore, by the rules of FIFA's own rules, it should be thrown out of the World Cup, just on that alone. But then, why have they competed for the last 40-odd years or something?
Exactly that, right. I think that's the difficulty with it happening right now and them getting thrown out right now. I'm all for trying to use sport to for betterment, but the issue here is like double standards and hypocrisy and all of this kind of stuff, right? As soon as you get down that rabbit hole, you can open up all sorts of comparatives. And I don't think it's actually right to do that. I don't think it's equivalence is not really the way to have a constructive argument about certain topics. Take segregation and discrimination or whatever else, sexism in this situation. Women here couldn't be priests or what have you for how long? Ages. And so suddenly you're saying, all right, well, women are not allowed to do this and women are not allowed to do this. so England get thrown out. But it doesn't quite. Then there's no equivalence. I don't think you can do this and you can do this is quite right. I'll give you another example. You're talking about harsh sentences. Okay, so you don't wear your hijab properly, you get thrown in jail. America, people have a little bag of weed and they get thrown in jail for 5 years. Like, it doesn't seem like that's appropriate crime for appropriate sentence for the crime.
Someone left a bag of hash at Birmingham New Street Station yesterday. Did you hear about this?
No, I haven't.
People thought it was a grenade. The station got evacuated.
Oh, really? Yeah. You know that from the smell, surely. But, what I'm trying to say is that there's equivalence that people will draw with this and this, this and this, this and this. And that's opening up a rabbit hole of all sorts. And you start talking about other countries where there's other Muslim countries all around the world. And I can't profess to know what the rules are in those countries in terms of segregation and not who can go to football and who can't.
No.
But there is all sorts of discrimination.
Very, very true. And everything is kind of a little bit hypocritical. I mean, even to the point you'd say, so people say, oh, right, so Iran might be doing arms to Russia. Well, we've sold our arms to Saudi Arabia, right?
Correct.
So should we be? If you want to go down that route,
correct,
then you think, right, okay, problem.
Russia are funding Syria.
Oh,
right?
that's a round circle. That is, unfortunately. Do you think politics and football should mix? Where's the line? Where should we speak up and where have we got... I mean, what the conversation we're having now really is something about far bigger than football. Where should we be involved?
The football fans...
I just think just generally in terms of let's just say football to politics. Should football be involved with what's happening in Iran? Because the problems in the world aren't just in Iran. A perfect example would be, if we just move back to football for a second, a lot of people saying, so if Iran get thrown out, who get put in? I saw one minister in Italy suggest that they're the biggest nation not qualified, so they should qualify. Yeah, okay. Ukraine we'd mention, which feels like a sympathy vote, and it's a nice story, but no, you lost to Wales, you didn't deserve to qualify. Someone's mentioned Peru as the best South American, but ideally it would go to the next best Asian qualifiers. Now, the team that lost to Australia, who compete in the Asian qualifying for the World Cup, the team that lost in the playoff to Australia is United Arab Emirates. Well, they ain't bloody perfect. And then beyond that as well, we're also hosting the tournament in a country that's got huge human rights issues itself. So what, you can throw out the hosts as well?
So do we involve politics and sport? I'm not a big fan of mixing them. What I think though is, like, FIFA has the rules that you mentioned, and FIFA has a responsibility to make football accessible to as many people in all areas of the world as much as possible. And FIFA is the guardian of the game, and it should be the guardian of the game. And football is also something that is very coveted, and if you talk about Saudi Arabia buying Newcastle and what have you, because they want to be associated with the sport. Qatar want to be associated with the sport. So FIFA can set their expectations of equality, inclusion, and what have you, as it pertains to football. I don't think they're in a space where they can set what their expectations are politically.
On national laws. Yeah, I get that.
And so if they were to throw them out because they weren't inclusive of women in football, then I think that's fair, because that's FIFA saying we're guardians of the game. If they were to try and say, well, you're persecuting women for wearing the hijab, I think then they're overstepping where their jurisdiction is. Now the difficulty is, what if the laws of a country go against FIFA's rules and expectations in terms of inclusion? I can't see a lot of situations where that might happen, but it might. And I think at that point you have to say, well, then you can't be part of FIFA.
Amnesty International believe that Iran is the only country in the world where it is potentially a punishable offence for a woman to attend a football match.
So we're talking about a one-off.
So that is
situation.
Different to everybody else, and that relates specifically to attendance of a football match, which obviously the people that enter the stadium for the national football team is governed by the Football Association of Iran. So therefore, you can throw that at them individually.
FIFA, I wouldn't say they were quick to suspend India, but they did. eventually suspend India, and then they figured it out and they withdrew them. I wonder why they haven't suspended Iran or gone down the road.
They've clearly,
fear factor?
in 2019, there were warnings. Yes, there probably is a little bit of that at the moment as well, because, like I said, if they want to go down the weapons argument, then eyes has to come back on ourselves. Eyes has to come back on America and other countries as well. I think, in all honesty, we're less than 3 weeks away from the tournament beginning. I think if all this had happened with the poor young girl who died a year ago, and this uprising around Iran was happening 12 months ago, I think they'd be thrown out. I just think that it's so close to the tournament that it's almost like push this away now. There is also a sporting discussion to be had in the sense that, and I know from what I read, and this is not all Iranians, but a lot of Iranian people at the moment would prefer the football team not to be represented at the World Cup. I'm sure plenty of Iranian fans do want to see their team play football. There's a number that don't.
If the World Cup wasn't in Qatar, you would expect banners or some sort of symbolism against what is happening. Like in that England-Iran game, if it was at Wembley, guarantee you there'd be someone would have placards.
There's no way England will ever play Iran at Wembley unless we host a major tournament.
I suppose, but my point being that if it was anywhere where you could, free speech was a thing, then people would protest or voice their opinions. None of that's going to happen in Qatar. Sometimes you talk about using sport to shed light on a situation.
Yeah.
That won't happen in Qatar.
Why?
Because they won't allow it. I don't think inside the stadiums, they won't allow banners of protest against certain situations. I don't think in an Iran game, anyone will be able to hold up something saying
certainly
support the hijab or anything along those lines.
Certainly I know from my experiences with Tottenham that in UEFA competition, you can't take anything in the ground that is a political message.
Yeah.
Even whatever that is, whether it's about religion, if it's about a government or anything, you can't take anything that's a visible political message into a football stadium.
It goes as far as Martinez at Manchester United. His nickname's the Butcher, and there was a banner or a sign that was referenced him as the Butcher, and that's been ordered to be taken down now.
Wow.
I'm not sure. I'm sure I read it in a thing that he acknowledged it, but they said they don't want that sign up because they don't like the nickname or something.
Okay. I don't know if there's a deeper story behind that.
Then you go down the censorship, right, of stopping people making political messages. So if you're not going to allow it in the stands and you're not going to allow the fans to make a message, then how can you ban a nation on similar grounds?
Well, this is it as well.
Banning a nation is making a political statement.
If Iran got removed and you put UAE in instead, we're just are we sitting there next week and going, should FIFA ban UAE from the World Cup?
I think some clarity around FIFA's rules.
I think this is part of it as well. It might be easier if it was, Japan are coming in instead or something. Do you understand what I mean by that?
100%. I think if FIFA's rules are one thing, they're probably quite clear. I don't think in FIFA's rules and regulations and laws of their member nations there is any grey area. I think the enforcement of the rules is where the problem comes in, where one country gets away with it, another doesn't, another gets away with it, another doesn't, and then you don't know where you stand anymore. I think people would want consistency in FIFA's enforcement of what they accept and tolerate and what they don't.
That was the point I was going to make, is in terms of a sporting context, the footballers of Iran have qualified on merit and deserve the opportunity to play at a World Cup. So it's always like it's punishable of a government and stuff. The footballers of Iran have not done anything wrong and deserve the right to play on a football pitch, even if they don't feel comfortable representing whoever's leading their country. And there is always that element, I think, when stuff is punishable against stuff that's been earned by sporting merit, always feels a little bit uncomfortable. It's like when teams get deducted, it's very different, but say a team gets deducted for financial irregularities off the pitch, always feels a little bit dirty to me, even though what's happening in the background is dirty and probably correct. It's not the fans' fault. It's not the players' fault, for example.
What about when English clubs got banned from Europe because of fan hooliganism? Do you think it would have been better that we just had to not take away fans or play behind closed doors in European football? Because the players then have missed out on something that they would have earned on merit because of the fan behaviour. The players don't control the fans.
Yeah, I mean, the period where in the late 80s, where English clubs were banned, is probably that. Now it's probably
try to get the home
surveillance
and all this kind of
whatnots
stuff.
In the late 80s, obviously English clubs were banned after the horrendous Hazel disaster. Was before I started going to football, so I'm not sure if I'm in the right position to comment how they'd have been around it. I've always reflected on that and gone, how's every club... I've reflected on Wimbledon winning the FA Cup in 1988 and not being able to play European football. Same with Coventry City in 1987. I think these clubs haven't done anything wrong. It doesn't feel right, but that's what they decided at the time, was to punish everybody rather than just one or two sets or those who'd been in Europe that season or whatever.
But it's like the off-field versus on-field, and punishments off-field and punishments on-field. Very difficult situation. I can't see...
when Olympians from Russia are allowed to compete under a different banner.
Neutral
flag. I mean, but what happens if Iran win the World Cup? Who are they?
Yeah.
It's not an individual, is it? It's team sport. I don't know how that works.
Yeah.
Iran are obviously in our World Cup group.
Correct. We played them first.
They also play Wales, and they also play USA in what feels like the biggest political World Cup group in history of World Cup competition, just having England, Iran and USA in the same group. There's been a lot of talk at the moment about this One Love armband that Harry Kane and I presume Gareth Bale is going to wear for England and Wales respectively. I know Rob Page, the Welsh manager, was like, we will wear it no matter what. But there's a lot of people giving criticism to wearing that armband at the moment, as in, so what? It's an armband for a captain. It doesn't change anything. But they're yet to see people coming up with solutions at the same time. So my question to you would be, considering just specifically in relation to Iran at the moment, England play Iran in 20 days. What should England do, if anything at all?
To do what, though?
I don't know.
Like, what
should they do? Should they do anything? As in, on the day when they play Iran, should they do anything? You talking about people can't bring banners into a stadiums. Yeah, good luck stopping the players getting something on the pitch.
That's when you question, okay, so now you're saying, what are we doing something to support the people of Iran?
Well,
like
that's the number one thing, is to support the women of Iran, of course.
Okay, what if there are members of the England squad that don't agree with the politics of, for example,
I mean, gender equality. I think there probably shouldn't be an England squad.
But you're talking about politics. Lucas Moura, at one point, he was under the spotlight for supporting Bolsonaro, who was the right-wing
He's out now, isn't he?
former president of Brazil, because he former president had taken over. But again, now, say there was a civil war in Brazil and Bolsonaro was persecuting people, but he might be in the team, but he might not want to stand up for what the rest of the team feel. You know, my point is that we can't preempt the opinions of the players off field. So if they wanted to make a statement around inclusion of women in football, I'd be all for that, right? It's her game too, and those kind of things that we've done before. Sure. Do it in the Iranian flag colours or whatever you choose. If they start saying, okay, we want to change the leadership or talking about the politics.
No,
That's not really fair.
But should they do something where you've got billions watching around the world and make a statement?
Yes. The objective there is to highlight...
we're the first European nation that's going to play in the tournament.
That football is for men and women everywhere. Should they make that point and make that statement? I'm all for that.
What would be great, truthfully, I think, is, and I don't think this can happen, I'll explain why, is they come out on the pitch and they have a photo together of the English players with the Iranian players, and they do something like that, like a football for all, a her game too, something like that. But I think part of the problem here is that the Iranians are in fear, right? Ali Dia, who was the record goal scorer in the world, there's some reports in Iran that suggest he's been arrested because he's spoken up against it. It's the greatest goal scorer in the nation's history. And a lot of the players, what they've had to do is just kind of black out their social media accounts and stuff. There was one player who plays for Leverkusen, I forget, his name escapes me. So, Nico, can you remember his name? I was talking about him this morning. No, he can't. But he spoke out and said, like, I can't keep keep in silence anymore. I need to speak out about this and gender equality for women in Iran. Brilliant. Deleted the post quite quickly afterwards. So these Iranian players are scared as well. So they can't come out and speak. So they can't do that with the English players. I don't think they could right now feel safe that they go back to their own country.
No. Very difficult.
So that's what I mean by in that sort of I don't think the Iranian players, it seems to me from the outside, and forgive me if I'm wrong, it doesn't feel like they can go out and put the statement out because there's too much fear for their own security and safety. So is it the responsibility of England and the FA to do something themselves?
No, it's not their responsibility.
But should we?
Because
again, to go back to the armband thing, that's what people keep saying. Oh, that's not enough. Okay, so what do you want them to do, and what can they do? And I don't know I don't have the answers either.
No, it's right. At what point? Which battles are worth us doing something, and which ones are not? Right. That's a very, very difficult one to go down. That's why I think if we support FIFA's rules and regulations, and what we stand for is that football is for women and for men. And outside of that, I'm not saying that there's no right or wrong. There's definitely lots of wrong, but it's the responsible role and responsibility of sport, for example. I mean, look at Wales, right? Right now, they could make a political statement in the game against England. I think
they're more likely.
They support England. They support the people of England because the poor people of England right now, this is very tongue-in-cheek, have a leader that wasn't democratically elected, right?
Yeah.
Rishi's in charge, and he wasn't voted for by the people. So what if Wales turn around and say, you know what, we're going to make a political statement that we believe, and ironically, he's leader of Wales as well, right? United Kingdom, Great Britain, and Northern Ireland. What's the political statement that you are willing to make, and what's not?
But interestingly, I feel...
So I think you have to be careful.
And it might be an English perception, but I actually feel that the Welsh group, because of the way Rob Page spoke last week about we'll wear this armband even if we're told we can't, I feel like they're almost more likely to do something.
It's a lower risk. And no disrespect,
well, this is the
but
other
it's a
thing.
smaller nation.
How would you feel?
The impact is.
How would you feel if England made a decision, and it's obviously not going to happen now, but it'd been okay if the decision was made a couple of years ago. How would you feel if England went, oh, fuck this, we're not going
to Qatar?
Yeah.
Yeah, fine.
I'd support that as well. I feel like the closer it's got, almost I feel the less infused for it because of all the kind of outside external factors and the fact it's taking place in the middle of obviously our football season as well. It's almost beginning to feel like a pain in the arse. Now, don't get me wrong, when the tournament starts, I want England to do well and I want England to try and win the tournament. But I would never have had any problem with England going, we don't want to be part of this, and setting the lead and going, we're not going to Qatar, we won't play in your tournament. I think the problem with that is what you risk doing is you risk then saying, they say, you're not going to the Euros either, you're not going to the next World Cup, and then you don't play football for like 8 years or something. And from the players' perspective, they don't want to risk that, right? No, that's their international career gone, right?
Downing tools is not necessarily the right thing to do. I think it's a tricky and difficult one. For people to decide what the right course of action is.
Exactly that. I feel like everybody wants them to make a statement, but no one's got a solution of how that statement should be made.
There'll be people listening to this podcast, James, who completely think that we should be sticking our flag in the ground and making a stance, and others that just think leave sport and football apart and don't, and somewhere in the middle. Interesting conversation to have, though, and I think anybody that wants to jump in the comments and the conversation, feel free to do so. You know, be respectful of people's opinions and understand that these are not things that are developed in the last 2 weeks and 2 months and even 2 years. It goes back a long time. And so we need to try and kind of look at the cultural context of everything as well.
We're also not experts on the conversation.
No, exactly that.
We're just having a conversation about it.
Tomorrow, James, do you want to tell people what's happening?
Lamichi, one of our patrons, will be joining me for the Sky Fantasy podcast because you're disappearing on a jolly up for the day in Ireland or something.
Yes, I'm going to Dublin.
It could be a riot as well because there's every chance I'll be hungover.
Nice. drowning your sorrows or celebrating one
drowning.
or the other. So Sky Fantasy Football coming at you tomorrow, listeners, along with a Clash of the Correspondents on Thursday. So stay safe. Hope you enjoy the conversation, and ciao for now.
Thanks, everyone. Be nice to each other. Cue music, please, man child.